Imagine a kingdom so vast, so powerful, that it stretched from India to Ethiopia, covering 127 provinces. This was the Persian Empire, and on the throne was Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes, a king who liked to flaunt power, wealth, and dominance. He ruled from the capital called Up, a grand place, where the royal palace shone in gold, silver, and precious stones. And it was precisely in this luxurious setting that it all began. The king, wanting to show everyone how powerful he was, decided to do a banquet that would last 180 days. 6 whole months of feasts, parades of wealth, fine carpets, marble columns, and drinks served in golden cups, each one different from the other. It was as if the king was saying, "See how great I am." And when that time was up, he still did a second banquet, this time by 7 days, only for the people of the city of Susa. Everyone was invited, from the most important to the most humble. The party took place in the palace gardens amidst curtains of white and blue linen hung with purple cords. The floor was marble and onyx. Everything was planned to impress. And there was a curious rule. No one was forced to drink, but wine was served freely, however each person wanted. The intention was to please and demonstrate how generous the king could be. But while the men were feasting with Ahasuerus, Queen Vashti, he also held a banquet for the women in another part of the palace. It was then that, in the 7th day, the king, his heart already merry from the wine, made a rash decision. The kind that changes the course of history. He sent for Queen Vashti, but it wasn't just to see her, it was for display. Ahasuerus wanted to display his wife's beauty before all the men present, princes, nobles, governors. She was to come wearing his royal crown, like a living jewel before the drunken crowd. The king had no thought for Vashti's respect, dignity, or honor. He wanted to turn her into a trophy, but Vashti refused. She said no. What exactly led her to refuse? The Bible doesn't detail her reasons, but many scholars believe she refused because she didn't want to be used as an object in front of drunken men. It was an act of dignity. But this no had serious consequences. Vashti's refusal sent the king into a tailspin. He flew into a rage, and his advisors further inflamed him. They said that if the queen could disobey, then all the women in the kingdom could also disobey their husbands. This was unthinkable in the culture of the time. Then, guided by his advisors, Ahasuerus made a drastic decision. Vast, serious deposit. She would lose the title of queen. What's more, a decree was sent to all provinces, proclaiming that every man should be the master in his house. The queen who dared to say no disappeared from history, and her throne remained empty. And it is in this emptiness that God's hand begins to move silently. A new chapter was about to begin, with a young, unknown, orphan girl hidden among the Jewish people. Her name, Esther. Before we continue, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and like this video. This will help me create more beautiful stories like this, and YouTube can deliver them to more people. Subscribed. Thank you so much. Let's continue. With Vashti's final departure and the silence of the throne beside the king, something began to trouble Ahasuerus' heart. Time passed, and he began to remember Vashti, what had happened, the consequences of his decree, and perhaps even the absence of her presence. The Bible doesn't say whether he felt longing, regret, or simply the discomfort of the void left by her. But one thing was certain, it was time to choose a new queen. And then his advisors suggested a grand idea worthy of Persian royalty. Organize aerial estate. A call for the most beautiful young virgins from all over the empire were brought to the palace. From every corner of the kingdom, from the richest to the most humble regions, young women would be gathered for a process of preparation and selection. Imagine the scene. Royal messengers riding through the roads of 127 provinces with the king's seal in hand, proclaiming the order, King Ahasuerus is seeking a new queen. Let all the young virgins who are beautiful in appearance come forward and submit themselves to the women's house under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch. These young women would be taken to the royal harem, where they would undergo an intense process of beautification for 12 months, yes, a whole year of preparation. 6 months with oil of myrrh, and another 6 months with special perfumes, balms, and ointments. All this before they even presented themselves before the king. It was more than external beauty. It was a complete transformation of behavior, dress, ways of speaking, walking, and carrying oneself before royalty. And this is where Esther enters history. Among so many chosen girls, there was a young Jewish orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai, a God-fearing man who lived in Susa. Her name was Hadassah, but was known by the Persian name Esther, which means star. Esther wasn't just beautiful, she was wise, humble, and obedient. A young woman who had learned early on to trust God even in life's adversities. She didn't seek to be seen, nor was she driven by vanity or ambition. She was there among so many others, but she carried something different. God's favor was upon her. Even though Mordecai was not allowed to enter the palace, he stayed at the gate every day, trying to find out how Esther was doing. And before she entered the harem, he gave her clear instructions. Don't say you're Jewish. Keep your identity to yourself for now. Esther, obedient as always, followed the advice. In silence, she mingled with the other young women, waiting her time, her turn, and above all, trusting that God had a greater purpose in all of this. While the others competed with makeup, jewelry, luxurious clothes, and seduction, Esther stood out for something invisible but powerful. Her grace, your lightness, your gentle and wise spirit. The world around us saw only a beauty parade, but behind the scenes God was already preparing a queen who would not only be the wife of a king, but the savior of an entire people. Before entering the palace, before being crowned queen, Esther was just Hadassah, a young Jewish woman, discreet, almost invisible in the eyes of the world, but not in the eyes of God. She was orphan. Her parents died when she was very young, and the Bible doesn't tell us how or when it happened, but what we do know is that she was raised with love, zeal, and the fear of God by a man named Mordecai. Mordecai was a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin, a direct descendant of Kish, the same lineage as King Saul. He lived in Susa, the capital of the empire, and was one of the many Jews who had been taken into exile during the Babylonian deportation under Nebuchadnezzar. In other words, he was a man who knew what it was like to live far from the promised land. Yet he remained faithful to his identity and his God. Esther grew up under Mordecai's care as if she were his own daughter. He not only cared for her materially, feeding, clothing, and protecting her, but also spiritually. He raised her to be a God-fearing, wise, prudent, and obedient woman. This foundation was what prepared Esther for the challenges that lay ahead. Even faced with the tragedy of losing her parents, even as an exile in a foreign land, God was writing a silent story with her life. And perhaps you think, but why would God choose such a simple young girl, an orphan, for such a grand plan? The answer lies in something that God himself repeated throughout Scripture. The Lord does not see as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. 1 Samuel 16:7. And in Esther's heart was something rare: humility, faith, and courage. 3 qualities that would change the history of an entire nation. When she was brought into the royal harem, she had no guarantee of being chosen. She had no status, no noble daughter, no expensive jewelry, no servants. But she had what no one could buy: the grace of God and a teachable spirit. Esther stood out from the beginning. The one in charge of the harem, Haggai, he soon noticed something different about her. The Bible says she obtained favor in his eyes. And this wasn't just human sympathy. It was God himself working his way through the unseen. Haggai gave her the best place in the harem, provided 7 personal servants to assist her, and treated her with special attention during the time of preparation. While other young women relied on vanity and luxury, Esther relied on something deeper. She trusted in God and followed his advice wisely. And what many saw as an ordinary young woman, God saw a key piece in saving an entire nation. After a long period of preparation, 12 months of aromatic baths, precious oils, and special care, the time finally arrived for each young woman to present herself before the king. It was time for each to show her best, to impress with luxurious garments, exotic perfumes, and adornments that enhanced her beauty. But when it was time to Esther, something extraordinary happened. Unlike the others, she asked for nothing more than what the harem's manager, Haggai, recommended: no extra jewelry, no flashy necklace, no golden crown beyond what was necessary. Esther didn't want to impress with extravagance. Her trust wasn't in outward appearance, but in the grace of God that had accompanied her since birth. And it was thus, with simplicity, lightness, and dignity, that she was taken into the presence of King Ahasuerus in the 7th year of his reign, in the month of Tebet, equivalent to our January. And then the unexpected happened. The king was enchanted by her more than by any other woman. The Bible says that Esther obtained favor in the eyes of the king. It wasn't just a gesture of kindness or a spur-of-the-moment whim. There was something about Esther that touched him more deeply. Her beauty was real, but her essence was even more striking. Ahasuerus saw in her a different kind of nobility, not forged by royal blood, but by character, grace, and wisdom. And the king loved her. Right there, the king placed the royal crown. Esther, the orphan, the exile, the young Jewish girl hidden among so many foreigners, was exalted before the entire empire. God raised her to a throne where no one would ever imagine seeing her. Ahasuerus then made a great banquet in honor of Esther. The name of the party, the Banquet of Esther. The entire court was summoned. There was food, drink, music, and joy. The king declared a holiday throughout the kingdom and distributed generous gifts. The silent, unknown young woman who had arrived without ambition was now queen of Persia and Media, but most importantly, she was exactly where God wanted her to be. And here's something profound this part of the story teaches us. Sometimes God puts us in high positions not for our glory, but to fulfill a greater purpose. Esther didn't know it yet, but she would soon discover that her coronation wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning of his mission. While Esther was in the palace, crowned as queen, her cousin Mordecai, he continued to live outside the royal walls, but never far from history. Day after day, he would stand at the palace gate, where servants, guards, and lower-ranking officials stood. Seemingly ordinary, that gate would become the scene of a pivotal event. Mordecai was not there by chance. Even though he could not enter the harem or see Esther directly, he cared about her like a father. He wanted to know how she was, hear any news, protect her as he always did. It was in this place, near the palace gate, that Mordecai heard something that no one else noticed. Two of the king's eunuchs, called Bigtah and Teres, were plotting an evil plan. They were guards at the king's private entrance, men who had direct access to his most intimate security, and for some reason they were furious with Ahasuerus. The Bible doesn't explain the exact cause of their hatred, but what's clear is the gravity of their plan. They wanted to assassinate the king. Mordecai, attentive, listened to the conversation and understood that what was being planned was pure treason, a coup against the throne itself. And what did he do? He immediately told Esther everything, trusting that she could do something. And so, once again, Esther used her position wisely. She took the information to the king, but made sure say that the warning came from Mordecai. The king then ordered an investigation into the matter, and indeed, upon investigating the complaint, it was discovered that the plot was real. The two conspirators were hanged, and the kingdom was preserved from a silent coup. But here's the detail that many overlook. All this was written in the book of the King's Chronicles, before him, as a simple record. At that moment, Mordecai was not rewarded, not even honored. No gold ring, no promotion, not even a public thank you. Just a note, a detail that seems insignificant. But God was saving this for the right time. This moment, apparently forgotten, would later be the turning point of history. The key God would use to reverse evil and exalt those who were silently faithful. And once again, we see a divine principle repeating itself. God sees what we do in secret, and in due time, He rewards. What seemed like just a bureaucratic record in the palace was actually part of the plan of heaven. Mordecai followed in silence, without glory or recognition, but with the clear conscience of someone who did the right thing. And there on the throne, Esther also had no idea that this simple action would be a fundamental piece in the deliverance of an entire nation. While Mordecai stood faithfully at the gate and Esther lived quietly in the palace, a new character appears in the story. Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and his name would soon become synonymous with arrogance, pride, and cruelty. Haman was ambitious and manipulative. In the eyes of King Ahasuerus, he appeared loyal and efficient. Therefore, he was promoted to a very high position, above all the princes and officials of the kingdom. He became the king's right-hand man. He was the most powerful man in the empire after Ahasuerus himself. With this promotion, the king ordered everyone to bow down and pay homage to Haman when he passed by. And so it was done in all the provinces. Everyone would bow down before him, everyone, one less man, Mordecai. Day after day, when Haman passed through the palace gates and everyone bowed, Mordecai remained standing, not out of rebellion, not out of arrogance, but because he was Jewish, and as a servant of the Most High God, he would not bow down to any man. The king's servants tried to persuade him, "Why don't you obey the king's order?" But Mordecai stood firm. They went to Haman and told him what was happening. And when they saw with their own eyes that Mordecai would not bow down, Haman was filled with anger. But Haman's hatred went beyond disobedience. When he discovered that Mordecai was a Jew, he decided that it was not enough to punish just that one man. He wanted to exterminate all his people. Yes, he didn't just want to kill Mordecai. He wanted to annihilate all Jews scattered throughout the kingdom. Men, women, children, elders, everyone. Haman was Agagite, a descendant of Agag, king of the Amalekites, a people who had been enemies of Israel since ancient times. And now, the old hatred was resurfacing with a vengeance. But Haman was cunning. He knew he needed the king's seal to carry out his plan. So he approached Ahasuerus with manipulative words, twisting the truth. "There are a people scattered throughout the provinces of your kingdom who have their own laws. They do not obey the king's laws. It is not right to tolerate them." And then he made a tempting proposal. "If it pleases the king, decree that they be destroyed. I will pay for it myself. 1,000 talents of silver for the treasures of the kingdom." It was an absurd amount, the equivalent of tons of silver. Ahasuerus, trusting Haman, took the ring off his finger, symbol of authority, and gave it to Haman, allowing him to do as he wished. Haman then ordered it to be written a royal decree, which was sent to all the provinces. On it was written the death sentence. On a set day, all Jews, regardless of age or gender, would be killed, exterminated, and annihilated. Their property would be plundered. The chosen day was decided by drawing lots, launched the Pur, as it was called, and the date fell on 12th month, the month of Adar. Imagine the horror. The letters reached every city in the empire. The Jewish people, scattered in foreign lands, were now marked for death, legally. About that, the king and Haman sat down to drink, as if everything was fine. But in Susa, the whole city was in confusion. The enemy was rising. God's people were threatened, and the throne that now sheltered Esther seemed too far away to help. But little did they know that the answer was already inside the palace itself. The letters were sent, sealed with the king's ring, written in all the languages of the empire, carried by swift messengers, crossing deserts, mountains, and cities. In each of them, the death sentence of an entire people was announced. The decree was clear, brutal, and definitive. On the 13th day of the month of Adar, all the Jews, both young and old, children and women, will be killed, exterminated, and annihilated in one day, and their property will be taken as plunder. Esther 3:13. It was a date marked on the calendar of destruction. The Jews, already exiled in a foreign land, would now be exterminated by official order, by the whim of a power-hungry man, and by the ignorance of a manipulated king. When the decree was read in the squares, the people were in shock. A deep silence fell over the cities. Inup, the capital of the empire, there was confusion and fear. People did not understand why, and the Jews were devastated. The countdown had begun. About that, Haman and the king were sitting and drinking, as if nothing was happening. While mothers cried for their children and men feared for the future, the two most powerful in the empire toasted the blood that would be spilled. But outside, at the palace gates, Mordecai learned of the decree, and when he read those words, his heart was pierced with pain. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, a symbol of deep mourning and humiliation, and covered himself with ashes. He went out into the city streets, crying out with a loud voice with great bitterness. The pain was not just his, it was that of all of God's people. And wherever the news arrived, the result was the same: fasting, weeping, lamentation. The Jews tore their clothes, threw themselves on the ground, crying out for the Lord's mercy. The entire empire was against them. There was no king, no general, no human force that could save them. The only hope was in heaven. But providentially, God already had a queen on the throne. And in the next moment of the story, we will see that Esther's calling was about to be revealed. It wasn't by chance that she was there. It wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was purpose. It was divine plan. Ashes, crying aloud, he didn't hide his pain. It was the pain of a father, a leader, a faithful man who saw his people marked for death. He refused to pretend everything was fine. The time for diplomacy was over. Now was the time to cry out. Esther, inside the palace, was still unaware of the tragedy. She lived isolated from the people, surrounded by servants, perfumes, and court rules. When she was informed that Mordecai was outside, torn apart, covered in ashes, and in great distress, she was shaken. He immediately sent him clothes so he could dress appropriately, perhaps unaware of the real reason for this public humiliation. But Mordecai refused. He didn't want comfort. He wanted her to wake up. Then Esther sent a messenger named Hatake to talk to Mordecai, and that's when the truth came to her. Mordecai told everything: Haman's decree, the date set for the extermination, the price paid to destroy the people. He gave Esther a copy of the official edict to see for herself. And there, in that message, the request came that would change her life forever. Go to the king, plead before him, and intercede for your people. Esther 4:8. It was time to act. But there was a problem. No one could enter the king's presence without being called, not even the queen. Anyone who came forward without being summoned would be killed, unless the king extended the golden scepters, a sign of mercy. And Esther answered honestly, "The king hasn't called me for 30 days. If I enter uninvited, I might die." But it was then that Mordecai wrote one of the most powerful statements in the entire Bible, words that have endured through the centuries and echo to this day. Do not think that you will escape in the palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain silent now, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows if for such a time as this you have not arrived in the kingdom. Esther 4:13-14. These words were like a fire that awakened Esther's spirit. She understood that was the moment. That was the calling. Then Esther responded firmly and with faith. Go, Gather together all the Jews who are present in Susa and fast for me, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, either day or night. I will also fast with my maidservants. Then I will go to the king, even if it is against the law. And if I perish, I perished. Esther 4:16. These words were spoken by a woman who understood that your life was no longer just yours. She knew the risk, but she did not hesitate. The fate of her people weighed more heavily than fear, and so began the 3-day fast. No food, no drink, just prayer, crying out, and silence before heaven. The people united. Tears rose as an offering, and heaven heard. Because at that moment, Esther was not just a queen, she became an intercessor, a bridge between the throne of the earth and the throne of God. After 3 days of fasting, prayer, and deep preparation, Esther made a decision that would define not only her destiny, but the future of all her people. Imagine the weight of that moment, entering the presence of the king without being called. It was like walking towards certain death. The royal court was full of intrigues and whims, and the king, who was often angry, could deny her request and decree her execution on the spot. But Esther didn't hesitate. With her heart pounding, she chose to trust God and move forward, and she said a phrase that will forever remain with her: "If I perish, I perish." Esther 4:16. This word expresses what many cannot understand today: a total surrender, an abandonment of fear, a decision to live the divine purpose whatever the cost. Esther donned her finest royal robes, placed the crown on her head, and walked to the throne room. Each step was a mixture of courage and reverence. The guards saw her and stood still, knowing her life was in the king's hands. When she entered, the king was seated on his throne, ready to judge. Silence fell over the place. But to everyone's surprise, the king extended the golden scepter toward her, a sign that Esther found favor in her eyes. She was spared death. With this divine grace, Esther invited the king and Haman to a special banquet, an opportunity to converse and present her case at the right time. This strategic approach demonstrated her wisdom and patience. She didn't reveal everything at that first moment. Instead, she used the banquet as a preparation ground, a time to gain more time, more trust, and to listen to the king. This attitude shows that, although she was courageous and determined, Esther knew the value of strategy and prayer to win battles, especially when life was at stake. After that first banquet, Esther knew she had gained the king's attention, but she also understood that she still needed more time to reveal the gravity of the situation. With wisdom and delicacy, she invited him to a second banquet where she felt ready to speak what weighed on her heart. At that moment, surrounded by the majesty of the palace, Esther spoke with humility and courage. She revealed to King Ahasuerus who she truly was, a Jew from the people threatened with extermination by Haman. Imagine the king's shock upon hearing this. He who trusted Haman now learned that his favorite was plotting the destruction of an innocent people, and worse, his own queen. Moved and angry, the king asked who had dared to do such a thing, and Esther pointed to Haman. The king, overcome with rage, could not allow this cruel plan to go ahead. He sent for Haman, who fell into despair and terror. In the end, Haman was condemned and executed on the same gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Esther then managed not only to save herself, but also the entire Jewish people scattered throughout the empire. The king signed a new decree, allowing the Jews to defend themselves and protect their lives on the appointed day. The story of Esther shows us that courage combined with wisdom and faith can change the destiny of a nation. After the victory, the Jews instituted the Purim festival, a day of celebration, joy, gift-giving, and solidarity. It was a time to remember that God never abandons his people, even in the most difficult times. Esther wasn't just a fleeting queen. She left a legacy that spans centuries. Her courage in the face of danger, her wisdom in dealing with the king, and her steadfast faith in God made her an eternal inspiration. She showed that even as a young, orphaned, exiled woman, it was possible to assume a leadership position and change the destiny of an entire people. Esther taught that true power lies not in the throne, in riches or in military strength, but in the heart that trusts in God and chooses to act. Because of her, the Jewish people were preserved, and to this day they celebrate the Purim festival to remember that, with courage and faith, victory is possible even in the face of the greatest adversity. This legacy is an invitation to all of us. When God places us for such a time as this, we cannot escape the call. Our attitude can save, transform, and bring hope. The story of Esther is a powerful lesson on the value of courage combined with faith. When the young queen decided to face the king, even knowing she could die, she showed us that true faith is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Esther believed that God was in control, even amid uncertainty and danger. Her courage came not from her own strength, but from trust in God's plan. This example reminds us that in difficult times, it takes courage to stand up and faith to move forward, because that's when God shows up in extraordinary ways. When we choose to trust and act, we can be instruments for great miracles and change. The story of Esther clearly shows us that God works in mysterious ways, often unseen by us. Even when everything seems out of control, when we're in strange lands, facing danger, or feeling small and voiceless, God is orchestrating every detail. Esther did not come to the throne by chance. Neither the king's decree, nor Haman's threat, nor even the plan to save her people were the result of chance. It was all part of a greater purpose. Mordecai said something that reveals this plan. Who knows whether you have attained to the kingdom for such a time as this? Esther 4:14. This phrase sums up what Esther's life teaches us. Every challenge, every victory, every difficult moment has meaning. God uses ordinary people in difficult situations to fulfill extraordinary plans. Thus, we are invited to look at our own lives and trust that, even in adversity, there is a divine purpose working in our favor. Faith in God gives us the assurance that we are never alone, and that our choices, no matter how small they seem, can make all the difference in the world. Did this story of Esther touch your heart? If it made you reflect on faith, courage, and hope, I invite you to leave a like below. Like this video so more people can learn about this example of faith and bravery that spans centuries. And don't forget, share in the comments what you learned from Esther, or perhaps a life-changing experience of faith and courage. Your story can inspire others. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. See you in the next video with more life-changing stories. May God bless you and your family.